The first time any American soldier was awarded the Medal of Honor was March 25th, 1863. On that day, 6 men who had just been freed from a Confederate prison in a prisoner exchange during the Civil War became our country's first recipients of the medal. One of those men was William Pittenger. He was one of the legendary Andrews Raiders. Pittenger wrote several books about his time with the Raiders. What you're about to hear is from a previous episode of this podcast, all about 2 of those Raiders, Phillip Shadrach and George Wilson. In Pittenger's book, Daring and Suffering, he said George Wilson was, quote, the most remarkable man of the whole party. He was not educated highly, though he had read a great deal, but in natural shrewdness, I rarely, if ever, saw his equal. Eventually, 19 of Andrews' Raiders were awarded the Medal of Honor. Another soldier was offered the medal, but he declined. 2 men were left out completely, even though they were there for every part of Andrews' raid, and both were executed at the hands of the Confederates. George Wilson and Phillip Shadrach. And here's another clip from that same episode. As the 7 Raiders stood on the scaffolding just before their execution, George Wilson asked to speak. At this point, the rest of the Raiders were being held in a jail in Atlanta. Pittenger wrote that the prison guards told them what Wilson said. I'm going to read what Pittenger wrote in his book, Capturing a Locomotive. He wrote, he told the rebels that they were all in the wrong, that he had no hard feelings towards the Southern people for what they were about to do because they had been duped by their leaders and induced by them to engage in the work of rebellion. He also said that though he had been condemned as a spy, yet he was none, and they well knew it. He was only a soldier in the performance of the work he had been detailed to do. That he did not regret to die for his country, but only regretted the manner of his death. He concluded by assuring them in prophetic words that they would yet live to regret the part they had taken in this rebellion and would see the flag of our country wave in triumph over the very ground occupied by his scaffold. This address made a deep impression on the minds of all who listened, and I often afterwards heard it spoken of in terms of deepest admiration. When he ceased, the signal was given, and the traps fell. You can find a link to that full episode in the show notes of this episode. In that episode, the story was heavy on the Shadrach side of things, so today is all about George Davenport Wilson. And there has been talk the last few months that these 2 war heroes will be awarded the Medal of Honor at some point in the near future. But when is still unclear. Today, we talk about all that in a conversation with a descendant of George Wilson's family, Ashley Wilson. She says she just wants to make sure her Uncle George is never forgotten.
It's been a whole lot of waiting. But Optimistic Opal over here, it's given me an opportunity to talk about him and teach people about him. So I think it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but it has truly given us the opportunity to connect to different friends, different family members that we didn't even know that we had.
My name is Josh Rowe, and this is Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. Let's just start at the beginning. Tell me at what point in your life you started hearing stories of George Davenport Wilson.
I was pretty young. I was about 6 years old, 6 to 8 years old. My father was, who has since passed, he was really into not only the Civil War, but to genealogy. And I think it was through his love of Civil War and genealogy both that really kind of led him to this. It was a coincidental find in one of our searches that we had done, or that he had done. And it was my sister, Sarah Wilson, who actually had said, "Hey, Dad, don't we know this guy, or do we know this guy? I've never seen this name before," but there was a relation that said Sarah Wilson. So she was the one who actually pointed the name out. And he was like, I don't know that name, but he was in the Civil War. So he did his research, and we found out that he was my fourth great uncle. And we then found out his story, which was, amazing. So I remember once we found him and once we found his story and put the family lineage together, my father was full of pride about George and who he was and what he did for our nation and the sacrifices that he had made. So from that point, about 8 years old, I grew up with stories of the Great Locomotive Chase and the Andrews Raiders and the speech that Uncle George had said right before he was hung. And I think that it was his story that made me such a patriotic person myself. So my father died in 2012, and it was something that he had fought for to get to this point because they were never awarded the Medal of Honor. And he thought, it's because of them and their sacrifice that we have the freedoms that we do, and we have the Medal of Honor. They need to be awarded that. So when my father passed away, it was one of the last things that he left unfinished that he wanted done.
What are your thoughts on that? The fact that it's a story that's been around for 160 plus years, and like you said, your father and your sister, I guess, found the connection. And whatever happens now, he won't get a chance to see it. I mean, there's a lot of generations who could have, been part of this that haven't had a chance to do that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that somewhere, my father, I think he would be smiling down upon us right now, saying, "Atta girl." I think that it's important to carry on the message that ultimately he wanted to be passed on, because at the end of the day, when we go, what kind of legacy do we have behind? And that was important for my father to know, that to let other generations know about the sacrifice that he made to our country, because when we're gone, what do we have left behind? So I kind of feel a little slight obligation because this was something that my father wanted, and he was so full of pride, and I am too. I mean, but I think because of the story and the message, no matter how I feel about the obligation, it's my father's last wish, but I think that the message is more important. So after we are gone, what kind of generations? I want future generations to learn about the sacrifice and his courage.
When you were first told the story, did you say you were six or eight? But through your life, have you tried to research more? Because several survivors wrote books, and other people have written books, and movies. There's been a lot out there over the years.
Oh yes. It was something that my father and I, before he passed away, we used to bond over. We had met so many new Wilsons that we didn't know, and to learn his story. I even have some old diary posts from a cousin of George, and how the worry, because this was a whole family thing. He was older in years when he joined, and even after he passed away, his son's story. So this was an entire family thing that my father and I would spend.
So here's a good spot to catch up on some George D. Wilson history. Records indicate Wilson was born in Belmont County, Ohio, which is in the southeastern part of the state near the border with Pennsylvania. His Army service started in Warren County, that's just northeast of Cincinnati. He enlisted when he was about 30 years old, and at the time he was divorced and had 2 children. Now, Ashley mentioned the story of his son, so here's more on that. George Wilson was executed by the Confederates for his role in stealing a train. He also had railroad experience before his Army service. When Wilson's son grew up, he also worked on the railroad and was killed in an accident during his time on that job. There is more on that later in this episode, but now let's go back to Ashley Wilson. We pick up the conversation as she is talking about her father's love for Civil War history.
And he was a Civil War reenactor. So we would actually travel to Manassas, to Gettysburg, to Chattanooga, and we've seen a lot of things. So as I grew up, I was taught the importance of courage, of standing up for something bigger than yourself.
So you've been here. Have you seen the gravesite? Have you done all those things?
I haven't seen the gravesite. Right. So my goal is that when this is all said and done, I want that award to go to a museum so future generations can learn about him and the story of the Andrews Raiders. And then I want to go say hi to Uncle George.
When did you connect with the Shadrachs? When did that happen?
It's been I started picking up the research about 2014. I want to say it was about 2018 that through Ancestry.com, Mr. Shadrach had reached out to me and said, hey, I had been trying to reach this Mr. Rick Wilson. And I'm like, well, so, and then I informed him that he had passed away. So, but I was his daughter and that I was looking to pick up where he left off. Where did he leave off? Can you help me? Yeah.
So what has the last 2018 or so, what's been the last 6 years been like? Because the medal was approved in 2008,
Yep.
Never got awarded. And as I understand it, there's been, kind of moments of getting your hopes up and then nothing happened. And so what has that process been like for you and the family?
I know you hit it right on the head, that getting your hopes up and being able to finally, finally see him honored and finally see the others honored. And then, being not let down, I guess that's a poor choice of words, kind of going back to the drawing board. And it's been a whole lot of waiting. But Optimistic Opal over here, it's given me an opportunity to talk about him and teach people about him. So I think it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but it has truly given us the opportunity to connect to different friends, different family members that we didn't even know that we had, and learning more about, like you said, that complex story. And I love being able to speak about him and teach people about, the awesome, a little rebellious job that he did.
There has been talk the last several months that George Wilson and Phillip Shadrach will be awarded the Medal of Honor at some point in the near future. Here's another clip from that previous episode on Shadrach and Wilson. There are several people in Chattanooga, Tennessee working now to see that these two heroes are honored. The congressman in Tennessee's 3rd District, Chuck Fleischman, told me in September that Shadrach and Wilson will be awarded the Medal of Honor. It's now just a question of when. Also, the people behind the Charles H. Coolidge National Medal of Honor Heritage Center in Chattanooga have been pushing for this. This is spokesperson Vince Butler at an event in January.
We believe their packet has been approved. It is sitting on the president's desk awaiting his signature. We know in 24, sometime this year, the president's supposed to sign that.
And retired 4-star General B.B. Bell has been working on this as well. He said this during his remarks at the funeral for Captain Larry Taylor in early February, speaking about the Medal of Honor recipients who are buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery.
Wilson and Shadrach will join them soon, I'm sure, and I pray.
So now let's go back to my conversation with Ashley Wilson. Even though, like you said, it's been a lot of ups and downs and getting excited and nothing happening, are you still of the mind that this is going to happen?
Yes. And whatever I can do to help to make that happen, I'm there.
What makes you optimistic, even though there's been the letdowns, like you said? Like what makes you think, okay, this is going to happen now, or it's something?
Well, first, like you said, generals and folks are still talking about it. So we still have the attention, we still have their ear, we still have, that discussion. So that keeps me hopeful.
When you just talk with your dad about this, like what did the family think of, like, okay, why did this not happen? Was there a theory?
My dad would always say that, the president and the government is busy keeping us safe. We have patience. We'll keep pushing, so he was always a very hopeful, optimistic person about it. I know that my grandmother had expressed frustration at one point, and kind of felt that it was a lack of importance, that they didn't care about him or his story or the gentleman that he died with. So I know that there was some slight flashes of animosity of, he's important. Don't forget about him. So I think that's that slight obligation that I talk about that was the biggest frustration of my family was, do not forget about him. Don't forget about his story, because he did sacrifice his life. And his son, which was his only son, I don't know if you know the story about his son, who also died on a train.
Died.
On a train. It was he was hit by a train, I should say. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Ironic. So it was a tragedy. It was a great loss to my family, and you can see that in my my Aunt Lola's her diary entries, and when she talks to the other cousins, how it was a great tragedy, but everybody was still, no matter what the loss was and how much everybody loved him and grieved for his loss, how proud they were. And I think that was the most impactful thing for me was, to see the frustration and to see, my grandmother and my father, whether he would admit it or not, get, almost feeling left in the shadows, left in the time of history, and that it wasn't about us, it was about him and the sacrifice. So it was this upbringing of all of that pride, but the only thing that they would ever show in terms of frustrations was, we just don't want him to be forgotten.
A big thank you to Ashley Wilson for this conversation. And we're not finished with the subject of Wilson and Shadrach, Andrews Raiders, the Great Locomotive Chase, and the Medal of Honor. Look for much more in my next episode of Tomorrowtown, Tennessee. This podcast is a production of News Channel 9, Fox Chattanooga, and Sinclair Broadcast Group Chattanooga. I hope you join me again real soon.